All right, everyone, we're about to get started here, just working on some additional live links in the background. But once we get those all live and running, we'll get the show started. Grab a seat, grab your favorite beverage, and get ready for another live digital kava session here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. Looks like we are all set here. We are streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, Instagram, and X. Got all the links checked and running in the background. So we'll go ahead and get our intro video going. Aloha to everyone. Welcome you to another live digital kava stream here with Tua. I'm Lone Rangering today. We're going to run a live here. We're going to walk through a bunch of handful of topics. Busy weekend here. A lot of college football going on. So I know a lot of people are there. A lot of exciting things. You are a BYU Cougars fan. We are 6-0. Pretty exciting. Bowl eligible already. And so that's pretty exciting here. BYU was able to win over Arizona. Obviously, there are some Polynesians on the Arizona team. They performed well, but overall, pretty happy that the Cougars were able to pull out the win. So it's been a long week this week. Been a lot of traveling. We haven't been able to put together as many live sessions and episodes as we would typically like. But as a night gig, we put these shows together as we can and as often as we can. We do have a couple of guest interviews that we're working on in the background. Hopefully, in the next couple weeks, we're able to put those together. Those are always fun, and as well as we continue our other podcast series on William Mariner or Tokyo Okamea series, and also working on our creation account series. A lot of people have reached out asking on when we will have Tevita Fale back on the program. David Tafale has been traveling quite a bit. We're working on his new setup for interviews out in Hawaii. So hopefully here in the near future, we're able to get him set up so we could have some more episodes with him. In the meantime, what we're going to do is we're actually going to start off with some social media questions. We're a bit backlog. We apologize to everyone. Appreciate all the comments, the likes, the shares. We've had a lot of activity across our different social media platforms. It's always appreciated. Looks like Noah. Welcome, welcome. I appreciate it. Noah, wait, we're going to walk through a bunch of questions. We're going to look at some social media comments. So if you want to shoot out some questions over here, Noah, we can talk through them. There are a bunch of questions and comments on social media that we're also going to walk through. So feel free to throw it our way and see if we can, address or at least have a discussion on your question. So whenever you have one, pop it up. Tonight is the night to discuss any viewer questions and comments, Noah. So, yep, shoot those over once you're ready with them. Sounds like you've been busy as well. So appreciate the ability there to join us, Noah. Malo, and welcome. Let's see here. I'm going to jump in here. We'll start with some of our YouTube comments and questions. And hey, this is an open mic night, Noah. Not necessarily tied to any topic or anything. Feel free to shoot it this way. We're just going to go through a bunch of comments here on social media and so forth. So shoot them over whenever you feel like it, Noah. But until then, we're going to walk through some of the social media comments. All right, we're going to start with this one here. This is from Popu Fangaua. And the comment here is evidence says we come from Taiwan. And what if we came from there and separated into two? The other group kept going and went to a region now called Micronesia, and the other group met the Melanesians and mixed with them before continuing their journey throughout Polynesia. Like, look at some of our Polynesian people have afros and curly hair, and after we pushed north, there is no way we didn't reach America and mix with them too and come back to the islands. Like, look at the Polynesians on the north, they have straight hair just like the Native Americans, and we on the south have afros and curly hair. All right, so basically it sounds like Popu's comment here is based off of the scientific research that says, through the Lapita discussion, that we come through Taiwan, down through Melanesia and into Polynesia, and then spreading into the eastern portion. We've discussed this a handful of times, Popu. I know this is a comment from YouTube, but if you watch this show, we recognize that there's a lot of scientific data that expresses that Polynesians influence or at least some type of interaction with Melanesia, Micronesia, and possibly from Southeast Asia. Really, a lot of our focus and the position that we have is to look at what we call Polynesians based out of the culture and the scientific, religious, um, and also the political structure, where those ideas come from. Obviously, we can have genetic material and archaeological features that spread. An example we use many times on the show is if the United States were to cease as a country tens of thousands of years from now, and we do excavations and we find DNA on the remaining remnants of the United States, we would find Asian, we would find a mixture of different DNAs that mix. We would also find a lot of the materials made in China. So, can we assume then that the United States originated from China? Well, because we live here now, we say no, it's not. The United States doesn't come from China, and actually, it's the polar opposite of what we would consider China today. So, what we recommend is look at the ideas, the constitution, look at the political structure, look at the religious aspects, a Judeo Christian value system. We look at the type of ruins that remain, and see what were the drivers of those ideas, and say that is where we could find the origin of that civilization. So it's not just looking at genetic material. That doesn't tell ideas. That doesn't tell the story on how America became America. Looks like Noah has a question here. We'll swing over to that. It says, okay, let's first start with the Tui Manua started 500 years ago. We wouldn't have any excuses of not remembering histories of Tui Manua. If you could clarify that a little bit further, Noah, I'm trying to understand if you're saying that if it started 500 years ago, we wouldn't have any excuses of remembering histories of Tui Manua. Um, Kind of give me more clarifications on that. And so, if I could understand that better, is if you're saying if the Tui Manua is young, then how come we remember it? Obviously, the younger it is, the easier it would be to remember. I don't think our position is that Tui Manua never existed. We recognize it existed, but the question comes across as to what influence and what impact it actually has and where it originated from. Obviously, there are many who take the position that the Tui Manua is where the Tui Tonga came from, and that the Tui Manua is older and is the, if you want to call it, the progenitor of the Tui Tonga. That's where we have a little bit of a difference in opinion. Um, Let me see here. Looks like additional context here from Noah on YouTube. Tongans used to be part of Samoa until they left us and joined Fijians. And there are so many intermarriages between Fijians and the original people of Tonga that is fully Samoa. I don't understand exactly how you come to that conclusion, Noah, that Tongans originate from Ha'amoa. And we're going to go over some studies this evening that kind of digs into that a little bit further. I don't know exactly how you come to that conclusion. One of the biggest challenges is archaeological evidence that shows that Samoa as a civilization existed. Um, that is a big challenge. So, and actually, all the archaeological evidence shows that if you want to call it the Tongan civilization or so forth, though I think it's one and the same, is much older and more organized on Tongatapu than anything you could find in Ha'amoa. So I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better. Noah, I'm not getting some clarity on how you do that. Now, the Tui Manua being, I mean, we've discussed this, the archaeological evidence as shown in some of the studies we've seen, is the Tui Manua is only 500 years old. And obviously, all the archaeological evidence on the Tui Tonga is close to, a couple thousand years old and potentially older than that, depending on how you look at the data points. We're going to look at some of the Lapita positions, and also looking at a ditch farming system that looks like originated from Tongatapu and may have been the farming technology that allowed survival throughout Polynesia and other areas in the Pacific, that may have originated from Tongatapu. At least this is what one of the studies proclaims. I'm going to go to this one comment. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Um, let me see. It's like here's another one. The Tui Tonga came after the Tui Manua decline. We challenge that. I mean, if you're only 500 years old, you really aren't having a meaningful impact on Polynesian culture and history. But I'm trying to find, there's a, let me see if I can find it in the background. But any additional comments there, in regards to the intermarriages between Tonga and Fiji, I really don't understand how that has an impact uh, geographically. I mean, the Tuitonga would often have his sister marry into the Fijian side just to kind of dilute some of that internal influence and power of his sister and sister's children over him. Let me see here. Noah, I'm not saying this because I'm being very prideful of my culture. It's just very hard to believe that Samoa came from Tongans, although the Samoa tourism confirms it. I mean, the reality is this, Noah, nobody was there, right? We have to just look at the data and just try and make observations or conclusions off of the data. Nobody can say 100,000% this or that. I just say hard for me to see the other way around. One of the comments before I move on to that thought, Noah, I don't think you're being prideful. We're just having a conversation. We're trying to understand what's going on, right? I'm a big believer we were all a unified nation, so to speak, throughout Polynesia. I know our Eastern Polynesian cousins or brothers and sisters, they like to isolate themselves a little bit more. I'm not saying all of them, but quite a few of them say, yeah, you Western Polynesians keep arguing about our origins. We do our own thing. Kind of feel the same thing about the Maoris in New Zealand. But when you look at all the religious uh, consistencies throughout the Polynesians, recognized figures throughout Polynesia, how we reference each other. It seems to be we were all one nation at some point, and we were just trying to understand that better. But no, I mean, I think these are fair questions to ask, Noah, but we really also have to be pretty direct and honest about what the data is. And as I mentioned, there is no significant data and even oral history that says Samoa is the origin, right? I mean, as far as Tongans are concerned, Ha'amoa was settled by the Moa clan that came from Tonga. Now, I'm not saying that that means those were the first people in Ha'amoa. What I'm saying is the original people that brought the Polynesian religious, political, social, technological structure, those came from my perspective, from Tonga. And it is quite evident when you look at the ruins, you look at the political structure, the social, and then just the longevity of the Tuitonga. It's very difficult for me to see how the Tuimanua, quote unquote, is the origin of the Tuitonga. Clyde Mort Malolele, welcome to the Digital Kava session. I appreciate you joining us. Let's see here, rehashing this old hag. This horse has been beaten to death, and I agree, Clyde Moore. It's really difficult. As the more we dig into this, the more difficult it is to defend the position of the Tuimanua. But what we are learning is there's a high probability that either the Tuimanua is what, kind of like either the Tuitonga was the Tuimanua while he lived in Samoa, in Ha'amoa, or when the Tuitonga left Ha'amoa, could have created the Tuimanua, kind of like he created the Tuihatakalaua and the Tuikanukupolu, possibly. I mean, we're just kind of brainstorming here, because it's really highly unlikely, just looking at the studies and so forth, that the Tuitonga or the Tuimanua is the origin of the Tuitonga. Mahalo apito MBM. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. No, like came from Tonga, we'll be praising them as our forefathers and originators, but now we are just brothers fighting against. I mean, it's the same thing on Tonga Tapu and within Tonga, Noah, right? The guys from Vava'u are very proud. Ha'apai, that's something. The biggest reason why, from my perspective, of the quote unquote origin is just it's oral history, the colonization and the separation of the Polynesian nation has led to this. That's my opinion. Um, but you know, that's just a reality. I think if you look, there's more than one account of Ha'amoa oral history that says, yeah, we are subject to the Tuitonga. We had allegiance. There were issues. They were, like you said, we're brothers fighting each other, 100%. But yeah, I mean, can't see too much beyond that. But when we just look at the data itself, Noah, it's really hard to do that. No, 100%. Clyde Moore, Quiet Night. Is it just me? Ambient Fleas accounts. Pretty much. There's a lot going on. There's college football's going on. Could be, I don't know what other rugby or anything that's going on in the southern hemisphere. And we haven't been as active on the channel as well. I've been traveling all week for work. I've been in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So that's really eating up a lot of time. And so, yeah, it is a little bit of a quiet night. Looks like we got 8 to 10 people throughout the different platforms. As mentioned, let me change the banner here real quick. We are on YouTube, Patreon, Instagram, and Twitter, and Facebook. So, yeah, it is a little bit slow start, but you know how it goes, Clyde Moore. Every once in a while, we just go and have a bucket without too many people, but the few and the proud here this evening. Looks like we have Henede here. I'm curious if Tonga has an oral history of the Maori people before or after leaving Samoa. All of my research points to Tonga and Samoa, but our histories really stopped there as far as I can see. That's an interesting thing, Henade. We've tried to have more conversations on that, and trying to understand, because we do feel a pretty significant, well, how do I want to call it, like distance or barrier between Eastern Polynesia, Western Polynesia, and I'm going to put New Zealand or the Maoris in the category of Eastern Polynesia. Some of the ideas that come out of that, Henare, is there's oral history that the Tuitonga, when the Polynesian nation got so large that there was an obligation throughout Polynesia to come to Tonga Tapu twice a year for the Inasi and the Polo Polo, that it became a pretty burdensome request, right? To have the all parts of the nation come to Tonga Tapu, that there was a decree that there should be, and it's a wise thing to do, should be regional families and regional locations that tribute for the Polo Polo and the Inasi were to be taken to, rather than bringing it all the way to Tonga Tapu, obviously to alleviate that stress on the people in the nation. That could be one reason that there is that distance. Obviously, Eastern Polynesia being pretty far away, and even New Zealand being pretty distant in regards to, and when I say New Zealand, it's the distance of the closeness of the relation, because it sounds like the Maoris come a little bit more from the Cook Islands, right? And from Eastern Polynesia. There's a distance in the relationship with Tonga Tapu, and I don't know exactly why that is the case. There is a lot of oral history saying that Kaulfonua Fekai was pretty militaristic, that other Tuitongas did not have such a militaristic approach to rule. They kind of leveraged more the religious uh, power that was given to them to govern, but with the assassination of Takalaua, his father, Kaulufonua Fekai seems to have pushed a more militaristic approach to obtaining rule. I don't know if that's why we have a movement of people from Eastern Polynesia bypassing Western Polynesia and Tongatapu and going straight to New Zealand. Not sure, but that's an interesting question there, Renate. And that's why we have these conversations, is to kind of walk through that a little bit and try to understand that better. New Zealand is a large enough land that could have led to multiple waves of settlements. So just some thoughts there, Renate, but appreciate the questions. Yeah, Clyde Moore. And then believe it or not, I used to travel a whole lot more. Was a EPC project manager building energy and infrastructure a lot through West Texas. So EPC is engineer, procure, and construct. I think one year, I think Google told me I I had Google track my movements, and in one year I went 4 times. If they added up all the miles, 4 times around the earth. Even though it's primarily just within the United States. So kind of glad that stage of my career is a little bit behind me. But yeah, it's good to be home. Let me put it that way. Noah here says, I want to confirm that there was a document of an interview with the last Tu'itonga Fatafehi confirming Tonga was pulled up by the hook given by Tu'imanuka, as you guys call it, for Tu'imanua Tonga Fushifunua. Yes, I've seen that. I've seen that story. I number one, I mean, we hear a lot of stories that are documented by Westerners, just like saying Tangaloa is a god just because they said Tangaloa lived on Langi. I understand what was recorded. I don't know if they fully understood what was being told. I don't know if Fatafehi is going to release such information that quickly. Don't know exactly um, what the intent is there. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to say maybe there is just a tale to be told. But a lot of the data shows otherwise, and especially even among the Tuitonga families, that's not part of the history. Um, let's move on here. Looks like we have Kifi. I've heard of New Zealand Moa being taken to Tonga for one. That there is a lot of oral history, and there's even like certain locations, as Kifi's mentioning here, right? I think it's Masi was sharing that story of Halamoa of some sort, some kind of oral history that when the Moa was brought to Tonga, that was something, obviously Tongans were going Polynesians, but I don't mean to come across, we were all one people. I want to preface it with that. But it is quite clear that Tonga Tapu had the most far reaching naval capacity than any other of the Polynesian islands. That's why the Ha'amonga is there. That's why there's a lot of mobility of the within the Polynesians tend to refer more to Tongans. I could be wrong there, but that's just my perception. That that amongst all the Polynesians, the Tongans were by far, and there's many reasons for that. Um, by far the more long distance and more frequent navigators throughout Polynesia. It was literally said that the second Tuitonga around the 1790s, before the white people came and messed up our true history. Well, I mean, that's the question though, Noah. You just said that it was written down by a Palangi guy. I mean, what do you mean? It's hard for me to say that, oh, that was the actual history before the Palangi people came and messed up. They were this whole idea of Maui being a god and Tangaloa being a god as they were written, because there's other records of Polynesians and on Tonga Tapu being white, basically like Europeans, right? And what they observed, and how actually a lot of the customs and the culture on Tongatapu was very similar to the customs and the culture of Jewish people, right? I mean, how come we never see those? But we see certain things like this. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit biased. Maybe that's what we're gonna, share that with. Henere says, completely understand in our oral tradition or Tupuna ancestors, Atonga down to Kahukura or Kaukula did return to Tonga, as you say, to pay homage, but after their generations, they stopped. And I agree 100% about the distance. Bro, honestly, much respect with what you're doing and reviving our histories with all of our Tangata Maloto. And that's really what it comes down to, Henare, is it's quite it's something that is pretty impressive in when we look at the Polynesian. Like I said, I'm going to say it. A lot of people kind of get a little uncomfortable with it. The Polynesian nation, in regards to physical distance, um, the largest nation in the world, right? Even by today's standards. And the fact that we were navigating it using that as basically the oceans were the highways. I'm not aware of any other civilization that did that on a um, regular frequency, right? Moving around, giving tribute. I mean, we're talking about, building physical structures and ruins with rocks, putting them on large ships, shipping them inter-island trading, right? There's actually studies of places like Ha'amoa being like a production plant for, stone axes, and how these stone axes were found throughout Polynesia and parts of Melanesia. It's a form of economy, of production, of trade. We were a pretty sophisticated group of people, and traveling in a manner that other civilizations could only probably couldn't even imagine. Everyone else was heavily dependent on land, and even then getting lost on land and navigating land. But the Polynesians were traveling thousands and thousands of miles using the ocean, and then splitting northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere. That's another unique thing about the Polynesian nation, is a lot of people were limited to, once you understood the northern hemisphere with the North Star, you stayed in the northern hemisphere, because once you came to the southern hemisphere, there was no familiarity on how to travel it. Um, and so that's really another thing that made our civilization pretty unique: the ability to navigate day and night over oceans and large distances in the northern and southern hemisphere is pretty phenomenal. And then the other one that I bring up sometimes that I think is very much overlooked: the fact that Tonga was able to remain and keep its independence. That is not a uniquely Tongan thing to celebrate. That is a Polynesian celebration. That is a testament to the Polynesian civilization. A portion of our civilization endured, right? Endured being overpowered with population, outmatched in technology and military, economic systems, but there was enough concentration and stability that allowed a portion of our civilization to maintain its independence. And that's something that just should be celebrated by all Polynesians. That is a claim by all Polynesians, because we all at one point shared the same religious, political, social, linguistical ties, that has changed over time, not only just by distance and also the deterioration of the original Polynesian nation government, but also through colonization as well. Um, yeah, understand your position there. Hamo says Tongans are from Samoa. Tua, hey, that's one position. Would love to hear more on why that is. So far, there's very little to no scientific data to back that, Hamo, but appreciate the thought there. and appreciate you joining us for this discussion. Teke Tonga, hey, glad you could make it too, Toko. Appreciate it. Tonight is going to be primarily interactions on the comments. So go ahead. We're going to interact as much as we can. Um, Here's another comment here by Clyde Moore. History is difficult to put together a collective history given that across Polynesia it unfolded on different fronts and we lack. That's 100% agreed, Clyde Moore. And so that's where trying to leverage the scientific approach to dating without leaning on them too much beyond that to help them give us certain data points on dates and then trying to navigate that with our oral history and some of the ruins that we have and trying to rebuild that, trying to put together a cohesive perspective on our history. But yeah, lack of documentation. I don't know what your thoughts are, Clyde Moore, or the other viewers. I'm a believer we had a written language at some point. Masi and others have different perspectives, don't really have that belief, but I'm a believer in that. And I'll express the reason why I believe that. You don't get to the sophistication of observing the movements of the stars, building sophisticated monuments without some level of documentation and written language. That's just my personal opinion. You cannot, it's very difficult in my mind to accumulate knowledge over long distances of or periods of time without being able to write it down. My kind of perspective is, well, for whatever reason, I don't know when it was I'll come to this story. Something happened that led for the Tangaloa title to kind of end and transition to the Tuitonga, right? There's something happened there. And the only reason why I say that or come up with that idea, because that's pretty much the same thing that happened with the last Tuitonga and the current kingly line in Tonga. There was such a significant shift in the religious, the political, the social structure that Laufiri Tonga recognized there was a need to change the political structure, religious structure of the Tuitonga and to hand it down to Tupou the First. I kind of get the idea that something similar must have happened with Tangaloa Etu Matupua and Aho Etu. That's why there's that kind of weird story behind Aho Etu and his brothers and how there seems to be some kind of chaos, which led to a restructuring of the government and the Kava ceremony, which is literally what Laufiri Tonga did with Tupou the First. Anyways, just some thoughts there. I'm kind of getting behind here in the comments. So let's see here. Polynesian Prince says, Tog, I don't know if you've seen the Moana 2 trailer, but I think the scene where it shows the broken pottery explaining the ancestors, I think that's explaining the founding of Tonga founding. And that's actually interesting that you say that, Polynesian Prince. There's a study, hopefully if we have time today, we're going to walk through the Nukuleka settlement on Tonga Tapu, the pottery, and also a new farming technology that was, pretty much through these archaeological studies point to a initial colony starting on Tonga Tapu that spread throughout Polynesia, right? So that's something that's kind of interesting. Hopefully we'll dig into that. But Sir Hamo here is kind of mocking that idea. But hey, we will see. There's some scientific perspectives that could add up to that. So we'll see. Fair point here. The world sees our world, our people through Moana. Hey, that's just the nature of the world we live in, right? Now everything, everybody would have, 20 years ago would have been shocked to hear that no one listens to the mainstream media and everybody gets their news through social media. And that's how we drive it. That's just the nature of those things. Where did the name Tonga come from? Now, that's an interesting question, Loma. Welcome to the show. I might start with this. Um, let me pull this up here. I'm going to pull up one of Tevita Fale's maps here to hopefully answer that question, Loma. And that's also, and I'll answer a social media. Let me see if I can find that. We kind of get this comment relatively frequently on social media where they're like, the origins from Samoa because Tonga was meant south, and south of what, in Tokelau, north of Tonga. Oh, right here. So I'm going to show this real quick. So we get this comment right here, right? The name Tonga wasn't even used back. Oh, let me see. The only island that makes sense when calling Tonga is Samoa, because Samoa is on the north of Tonga, right? Again, Tonga is south, Tokelau is north, and Samoa in the middle. If Tonga is south, then south of what? News, that's kind of the thinking, right? Is we're centered in Samoa because Tonga is south and south of Samoa, and then there's Tokelau, which is north. However, we're gonna come back. The name Tonga does mean south, but why was it called the South? So if you notice here on Tevita Fale's map, the first thing you'll notice is that this map's upside down, right? So this map is upside down, meaning the standard map in the Western civilization is north is up. In the Polynesian perspective of the world, south is up. And why is south up? Because south is Tonga. Tonga Tapu was the southern. That is, south was the primary um, cardinal direction. And so that's why Tonga was called Tonga. It because it was on the southern tip of the Polynesian nation. Obviously, we have New Zealand there as well, but New Zealand, in regards to Polynesian history, is very young, right? It's a young part of the Polynesian settlement and history. So Tonga Tapu, meaning the sacred south, the southern part of the Polynesian nation. That's where one could assume, Loma, where the name Tonga comes from. That's my perspective, but it's all driven from south being the primary um, cardinal direction that was used. Everything was based of pointing towards Tonga Tapu, which is pretty much the farthest south uh, island for most indications, apart from New Zealand. So that's kind of the concept there, or the response to that, Loma. Um, Trying to catch up here on the comments. No, there's a type of Tongan house named Fare Whakamanuka. It is said came to Tonga around the 9th century, which is not far from the start of the Tui Tonga, which could confirm Aoeitu biological. That's the funny thing about that is, I mean, there's all kinds of whakawhisi, all kinds of words that, a Fijian type, a Manuka type, you know, there's a Hawaiian, sweet potato, kumala Hawaii. That to me is not an indicator of origin. That is an indicator of multiple different type of ideas. When a new idea was developed that was useful or successful, at some point that idea migrates to the center of the civilization. Okay. Now, in regards to that second portion where you're saying in the 9th century, all the historical data is showing that that's the Western man's Tuitonga list that says Aho'eitu started in the 900s. Um, David Tafale says it's goes to the 400 AD. The archaeological studies that are being made on the Pai Pai Telea, and also we did a video on the Malaevakapuna mound, um, and also other studies in close to Toloa, one of the Tui Tonga settlements. it's pushing back the Tuitonga timeline to the BCs. So we don't know how long the Tangaloa clan were the leading or the chiefly clan on Tongatapu, but we're looking at the Tuitonga. It's looking like a couple thousand years old from our perspective. All our histories are locked up in a museum, and that's it could be. I know we have a run brother from Fiji saying all the data to prove. I mean, Loma, I got to read this out because we do put our episodes on voice only or sound only platforms like Spotify and podcasts. So all our histories are locked up in a museum in Europe somewhere. I was at, I want to say, the Hatfield House in England a few months ago, and I was walking up the stairs. This is where Elizabeth II was living when she was told her sister was killed and that she would be queen. And walking up the stairs, I saw multiple Tongan war clubs displayed that look very old. So possibly, don't know, Loma, but that's a real possibility. Um, let's say here, even locals say that it came from Aho'etu's brothers who were Samoan, but out of all the islands, it has to be Manua or Manuka, not Fare Savai or Fare Upolu, but Manua or Manuka. I mean, once again, oral history alone kind of gets a little funky and wonky because you'll find oral history that contradicts itself. There is, like I said, the archaeological data makes that very difficult. The Tu'imanua is not old enough from my perspective. Those are kind of interesting tidbits, Noah, but it's hard for me to really pinpoint that. Um, but that's just my thoughts there. Clyde Moore, you know about the Rongorongo tablets too, found on Easter Island and hieroglyphics on the Eastern Pacific Islands. I have heard some comments from people left and right. Clyde Moore, I'm gonna make a note of that and look into that because someone had made mention of that, and also that Rongorongo is a name found in Eastern Polynesian in multiple areas. So tablets and Easter Island. Okay, I'll take a look at that and see what I can come up with, or if you have some links there, we can definitely take a look at. Noah will north. Well, once again, Noah, will north in Tonga is Tokelau, but not Ha'amoa. Once again, like the map here shows, the primary or the cardinal direction is south, and that's the driver behind it, right? Um, that's the thinking behind it. This idea that you have to be geographically in the center. Um, that's not. You go look at all empires. The capital or the origin of the empire is not always at the center. Look at the English Empire, look at all the empires. The center is not, doesn't mean you're the origin. Um, yeah, they need to get it right. Tonga is north. Basically, it is the cardinal direction, right? Um, Kifi Tupo says, I'm curious to know if the ruling classes have any hidden information about our history. Depends on what you mean by ruling classes, Kifi. Um, there is a saying that we find out who you are when you die, right? I remember hearing that phrase at a relatively young age. And I'll give you an example. So there was a noble, I want to say maybe in Viney or somewhere. He's the noble. He gets all the recognition, he gets all the stuff. But then when he died, he got buried at basically the cemetery where everybody else gets buried. And I thought that's strange, right? So I was asking one of the elders in Mua and saying, don't you find that strange? Like typically when you're a noble or whatever, there's like a family burial place. And that's where this person shared with me is like, you know who you are when you die, right? If you die and you get buried where kings are buried, then there's a good chance you descend from the heirs of those who are quote unquote the ruling class. But there are several occasions where the heir will resist the title, but still inherits the land and everything else. So I agree with with the kind of the comment overall, Kifi, but just want to preface it with just because that person is sitting at the head, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is quote unquote the ruling class and has the information. The people who have this information may be the ones that just walk around and look like you and me, but descend from those who actually have the line and the inheritance that you're referencing there. But I agree in general with the comment. Um, let me see. Let's see. I'm trying to skim here through the comments. Another comment here from Clyde Moore. We all got to bear in mind how much our languages have changed since contact with the Palangis, the days, and 100%. There's a lot has changed over time, um, by isolation and by just influences by other colonization and languages and so forth. 100% agree with that. Clyde Moore. Um, let's see here. Oh yeah, well, it looks like, hey Jan. Hey, why are you going to Facebook jail, Jan? Oh yeah, well, you got the FBI and the CIA is going to be on the show here pretty soon. But says, but when you said you saw Tongan war clubs in England, I saw the same thing when I was there also. Also saw this Palangi man sell an old Tongan war club for that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know how these things, I don't know if these were gifts later on or, you know, Westerners visiting at various times and taking artifacts. But yeah, I was kind of shocked to just see it sitting on the wall. At first, I didn't recognize the War Club. It wasn't until I came closer and saw the etchings on it, and I was like, dude, those look like the Tongan War Club. So I did a search online, and lo and behold, it was a match. Has those, those traditional etchings that, that I guess they use the rat's teeth to do some of the, it's one of those intricate, really fine etchings on it. Um, but that's interesting. Looks here, Clyde Moore's answering Jan's question. I don't know about ruling classes, Kivi, but there's a recent video on YouTube of the Tamatauhi of Pai Pai o Telea, of him saying that there are stories the locals keep to themselves. There is a lot of truth to that. Um, and that's some of the challenges of oral history. Um, that's gonna be challenging. Hey, that's a fair question here. It looks like Hamo is saying, let's see if we can pull that up and let's take a look at that, Hamo. Because that is something that is up. The Mate Maatonga is getting ready. Ooh, let's start with this. Mate Maatonga is getting ready to play the Kangaroos. On Friday, October 18th. My thoughts on that, how much they seem to be leaning towards a lot of the younger guys, right? I think Lihai Hopoate and Olokalatu and a lot of these younger guys that were selected here. Adding Fonua Blake as being like captain together with Taumalolo. Yes, agree 100% with this. The Habs with Isaiah Katoa really developing quite nicely. Let me get rid of these family chats there. But I think that's really interesting. So let me see if I can pull up the actual Matematonga squad here so we could look at them. But that was kind of my initial thoughts is seems like a pretty heavy investment on the youth. Let me see team. Let me see if I can find the team that's been announced. All right, looks like this one right here. Like I mentioned, here's pretty heavy on, Lehigh Hopoate. We got a veteran here in Daniela Tupo, Toltaukola here, relatively young. Alamoti, not as familiar with him. Obviously, Sioneka Toa Tui Lolohea, still relatively young. Isaiah Katoa, Adam Fonua being captain as well. Siliva's a veteran. Not too familiar with Daniela Paseca on whether he's young or not. Eliesa Katoa, Hamole Olokalatu, and Jason being the veteran there. Sonny Luke, young. Sitiri Tuponiwa, young, relatively young. Felicia Kaufusi, veteran, and Keon. Keon was the younger guy, now shifting over to being a veteran. So pretty excited. A good balance of veteran and really young players. I'm not man. I'm not sure. Let's see. Are you that Samoa the tour going to England? I'm not familiar with who's on the tour Samoa. Let's see if we can find a link here for the tour Samoa guys. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with the Matematonga Tonga squad England tour. Let's go with England tour. Slee Torsam UK. And see if we can find. Okay, I'm going to share this. So Anthony Milford, okay, good experience there. Yeah, I'm trying to look at the names here. They're not sticking out. Obviously, Jerem Luai. That's Asiara, okay. Yeah, I guess these names aren't as familiar. Oh, Tuivasa is going to go with the Toa Samoa. Yeah, these are new. Are these guys pretty new too, Hamo? Like, yeah, a lot of these guys, I was hoping to see more of the guys that you guys had on the, like Paulo and those guys. I'm not seeing some of the guys that took you guys pretty far in the World Cup. Obviously, Swali is going to rugby union, but yeah, I'm kind of surprised by this. I don't know how to respond to this, Hamo. Not sure. Hopefully you guys do better than us. I'll tell you that, Hamo. I mean, hopefully you guys do better than us. We did not do good in our tour of England. And after that tour, Mussy was like, we got to get rid of Christian Wolf. Mussy was not very happy with that. Yeah, that's a fair concern, right? Getting the right referee. Sometimes these refs can be a little bit too much. Yeah, I mean, interesting. That was kind of something that was looking to see. I did have, let me see if I can find it. I did have an article that I wanted to. Let's do this. Let's watch this video of some of the interview with the boys from the Matematonga on some of the Q&A that they had.
There's a cover ceremony, but we're going to ask them the most random question and see what their reaction is. What's your favorite Tongan word?
Oh, one.
Kai.
Tongan word of Atu.
Favorite Tongan word? Toko. What's your favorite song so far?
Oh, one.
Malu e Fiafi at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
Been playing that. No, I don't want to sing. I don't want to embarrass myself.
Lau e toi tapu pe ke lotu ma upe.
Can you sing it?
Lau e toi tapu pe ke lotu ma upe. Lotu ma upe.
I remember that song growing up in Tonga.
If someone's going to sneak out and go get McDonald's, who would be that person?
Coca-Cola.
Is he gonna see this?
Liver.
From the train on the bus. We'll go Joshua. Siwa Wong, for sure. That guy, Siwa Wong, yeah.
Oh, Saliva Havili for sure. He's so fat.
Who is the most?
See, a lot of, I mean, obviously they didn't rear everybody, but a lot of the younger guys here, but young recognizable names, I would say, with the Matematonga. So that's a pretty fair concern to have with the Toa there. Hamo is like you're mentioning right here. I don't know. I'm not as familiar like the younger guys on the Matematonga. Maybe because I follow them more, I recognize the names more. But a lot on the Toa Samoa, maybe that because they're younger, I don't recognize them as much. The names and the individual players are dangerous. Hamo, the real question. It's always been the Achilles heel for all Polynesian teams. How much time they spend together is a big challenge because you gotta really figure out how to gel together. They gotta, figure out those combinations in the short amount of time. New Zealand, Australia, England, they're able to develop those combinations and those relationships over longer periods of time. So it'll be interesting. These are always fun. Epic. If there was a Matematonga Toa Samoa version, I agree 100%. And that's something I think I saw. I saw the article, but I think we also covered it here on the show, Noah, of Jerome Luai, I think, kind of promoting that idea that there should be kind of like a state of origin, but a Polynesian version. I think that would be pretty awesome, and pretty cool as well. So let's see here. There was another article that I wanted to take a look at, and hopefully I put it up here in the show notes, but we will find out. And it was around the idea of trying, because there is a little bit of drama going on. I think it was this one here. There's some drama between Tonga National Rugby League, which is used to be the governing body in Tonga and has the Matematonga Tonga. I guess it's just a Polynesian thing. We have a lot of drama with our organizations leading our teams. As of late, Tonga, these guys in rugby union, and the guys go to the World Cup and they got to pay for their own food. They about to leave the hotel, and the hotel says who's going to pay for the bill for everybody staying at the hotel, and the players have to. It's pretty sad, right? Players have to pay their own stuff. In Samoa, similar financial challenges have coming up lately. And then, I would have thought Fiji, with the bigger economy, would be less susceptible to those things. But I guess same thing happened with Fiji. There's allegations of corruption, not paying. At least Fiji's better. They're just arguing about paying the bonuses they were promised. Tonga and Samoa are like just trying to pay to stay alive. Right? Because you play for Tonga and Samoa, it's not that you don't get paid, but you actually lose money because you got to pay for your accommodation, pay for your travel. It's interesting. Yeah. So like Luke saying here, right? Yeah, it's always the money. There's always a challenge there. And as Clyde Moore says, Polynesian Foodie has some of the most expensive administrators in the game. Exactly. These guys take the millions of dollars and just spend like there's no tomorrow. And then they wonder why there's not enough money to pay for their teams to go overseas. Anyways, but kind of talking, this article talks about, the legacy identity crisis that the Matematonga, as you guys have noticed, even in that video that we just saw, there's that new logo of like the 13-man team with the chevron in it rather than the Matematonga logo. There's been this shift of trying to move away from the Matemaatonga name for the TNRL. But there's an interesting development. It says, in a bold move aimed at reshaping the future of Tonga Rugby League, the Tonga National Rugby League, who's not really running the team right now, but has teamed up with Sorbiro. I don't know who these guys are. I'm going to look them up as to who exactly they are. But they seem to be some kind of investment kind of firm or something. And let's go over here. Transforming sports with cutting edge expertise. Sorbiro, we empower sports organizations through the innovative platforms that drive success. Elevate fan engagement. Athlete, we just add data. So it's basically trying to build momentum and engagement with fans. Really interesting. I think that has some interesting aspects to it. So they're trying to join powers with Tonga National Rugby League, according to this article, to try and drive engagement. So I guess that's what they are. A rising powerhouse in sports consulting, technology, and operations. Despite its relative youth, Sorbiro has built a reputation through collaborations with leading global sports brands, bringing innovative insights gleaned from the financial sectors of London and New York into the world of sport. Their expertise promises to push Tonga Rugby League to unprecedented heights. Okay, so it looks like this firm right here is trying to build a partnership, trying to give a friendship arm to the TRL 13, which is that new organization that's leading the team now, with the Speaker of the House in Tonga kind of leading that. That's interesting. Looks like they're trying to figure out the branding and the partnership situation that's going on there in Tonga. So that's an interesting development there. Definitely you can leverage the brand and the loyalty of the fans to kind of build something like that. So it says here, Sorbiro's vision of making Tonga a world-beating rugby league nation remains in play, but the road ahead has grown more complicated. Whether the iconic Matemaatonga name survives this upheaval or becomes a memory, only time will tell. What's certain is the stakes couldn't be higher, not just for rugby, but for the heart of Tongan sport itself. No, 100%. Interesting there. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Kind of related to this as well is a story of the youngest and richest high school rugby player in the world. I'm going to pull this up here real quick. Let's see if I can find it here. Leaving rugby union and going to rugby league. Let me see. Right here. So this young kid right here, who I guess he's just a junior, 11th grade, phenomenal schoolboy, rugby union player, but he's been compared to Greg Inglis and Israel Folau. But it looks like he's not staying with rugby union. Who would do that with how Rugby Australia is kind of pretty backwards, how they treated Israel Folau, such a bad job they've done with that. And then the NRL is just kind of a sexy organization to be, a lot more money, a lot more freedom. Very, very interesting. That's maybe one of the concerns for Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji, is as if rugby league continues this momentum with the Toa Samoa and the rugby league, the Matemaatonga, that could change the flow of talent to rugby union. And we all know rugby union is heavily dependent on the Polynesian talent pool to build stars and to develop the game not just in the southern hemisphere, but in the northern hemisphere as well, right? So let's see here. Hey, Tongan style, welcome, welcome. They really want to push up the fan base to the Tongan team in the form of investments. So they take away the Matema Tonga name to outside Tongans for marketing. It's necessary, not necessarily, but for financial reasons, tapping into a larger market is what makes sense. And that's why they want to do it, right? So that's the interesting thing there. Have you seen Israel Folau's podcast with Samu Karib? No, I have not. Apparently, the era NRL came up first in TV rating in Australia, beating AFL. That's yes. I mean, when you have Origin, I mean, I think I saw a few years ago an article. This was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, bringing up an article of like the All Blacks versus the Wallabies test match. Bledisloe, and it wasn't even like top 50 in views on TV. Like Australian top model was higher, and the top ones were like State of Origin and a couple NRL games well ahead of the rugby union. But definitely the NRL is on to something. My perspective, it's the most successful and most exciting domestic tournament in the world. And then when you add the State of Origin, it just puts it into overdrive. So pretty interesting there. So let's see, looking here at time, I'm going to transition into the articles that we were discussing earlier. Unless there's some additional comments or questions on what we've discussed so far. Let's see here. Present. Share screen. I want to go window. We're going to do this guy. All right. So we're going to close out today's show just looking at a couple articles, scientific articles. And as we discussed earlier, some of this is related to Lapita and some other findings. So this one was a scientific article out of the Journal of Pacific Archaeology in 2010. And this is basically, both of the articles we'll skim through. I just highlighted some specific areas we'll touch on. Makes a case for Nukuleka as a founder colony for West Polynesian settlement, new insights from recent excavations. So these are the excavations at the Nukuleka site. Obviously, there was a Tuitonga settlement there, but it also seems to have been in a much older settlement before that. But we'll skim through here, and it says, decorated ceramics of Western Lapita style, the presence of tan paste ceramics foreign to Tonga, and new radiocarbon dates support Nukuleka as a site of first landfall in the interval of 2,850 to 2,900 cal years. So that's basically almost 3,000 years from today. The ceramic assemblage is distinct from West and Central Fiji, and an independent origin for Fijian and Polynesian colonizers is argued. So basically what's being expressed here is there are some unique pottery markers that are independent of Fiji and Melanesia, right? So the settlement quickly expanded on the Nukuleka Peninsula to a 20-hectare or more in size, forming a central place for the Eastern Lapita province in Tonga, Samoa, and the Lau Islands of Fiji. Nukuleka, we believe, provides insight into the cultural, if not biological base from which ancestral Polynesian society emerged. So what this is basically, in a summary from what I can get from it, is the distinctness of the Lapita pottery that separates itself from Fiji is showing a development of a new culture, a new technology that is leading to a hypothesis that the Polynesian culture as potentially originating from that Nukuleka settlement. That's what I'm kind of getting from this. This is the hypothesis of this scientific paper. Says renewed study of the Nukuleka site was undertaken in 2007 to further evaluate its status as a founder settlement and to gain additional insight into the nature of this occupation. So basically, when they did further insight or their initial looks into the Lapita findings and archaeological findings in Nukuleka, this idea of a founding settlement popped up. So they go back and do additional studies to try and see if there's any real meaningful data behind Nukuleka being a founding Polynesian settlement. So this enables an examination of the process of first Lapita settlement in Fiji and West Polynesia and the role of Nukuleka as a central node for expansion on the eastern periphery of the Lapita domain. So basically, with Tongatapu here, with Nukuleka, then and obviously with the general acceptance of origins from Melanesia and moving eastward. Surveys and test excavations up to 2003 were able to document other places in the Nukuleka Peninsula with the Lapita decorated ceramics. These identifying the earliest settlement episodes, however, appeared exclusive to Moala's Mound. So the reason why I have this highlighted is that they're finding at these some of the mounds in Nukuleka are integrated with the Lapita pottery at the same time. And in the other article that we'll look at, there is a connection of mounds / pits to a innovative farming technique that also further pushes the idea of Nukuleka being the founding settlement for Polynesia. So we'll skim down here. So basically, this one is kind of interesting. I had never heard of this before, but so obviously the Lapita locations here with the black dots, Lapita age shoreline. So as we see, the shoreline in these physical areas is very different from what it is now, right? Because the modern shoreline looks like these used to be Nuku'alofa used to be a little island on its own in some of these areas. And so the shoreline on Tongatapu has changed significantly, which I thought was interesting. That's just a graphic showing some of the grid and the grid approach to the archaeological excavations. I'm going to skim down here. I'm just going to touch the areas that I have highlighted here. So it says here, the ceramic data from Nukuleka radiocarbon dates in the absence of comparable sites in West Polynesia identify it as a founding settlement for Polynesia. We have discussed the Tan Pei Sherd assemblage already and its potential source origins from a dacitic high island of the New Hebrides Island archipelago. If correct, this implies a colonization event from central island Melanesia, a difficult feat given the voyaging distance between 1750 and 2,300 kilometers. So basically saying some of these things are directly from central Melanesia rather than a gradual movement from central Melanesia into Polynesia. There's a pretty big jump in the pottery styles that kind of challenge this idea of, oh, they just went from island to island moving eastward. There's other things to discuss about that as to why, we don't put, in my perspective and Masi's as well, we don't put a lot of emphasis onto the Lapita. When you're a long distance voyaging society and trading, that would explain something like that. So let's see here. The earliest settlement of Fiji occurs 2,950 to 350 years ago at Borewa on the southwest coast of Viti Levu. This leaves 100 to 150 years for the infilling of the Fijian landscape and for the incremental settlement expansion eastward into Lau Tongatapu and Samoa. So 150 years for slow migration eastward is not a lot of time. And that, in comparison to this statement here, saying that some of these potteries that originate from central Melanesia, it's kind of disproving a slow migration into the Polynesian, from Melanesia into Polynesia. So here is basically what it's kind of coming down to in conclusions. The presence of small sample of Western Lapita aspect ceramics at Nukuleka has been recognized for a long time as identifying one of the earliest settlements in the Kingdom of Tonga. The exotic nature of temper sands in a collection of associated tan paste sherds was documented also in 1999, and this supported a further argument for Nukuleka as a founder colony for Polynesia. With no comparable temper identified in Fiji, and with the only comparable temper found in a sherd in the Reef Santa Cruz, and the orthodox incremental settlement model for Lapita expansion across the Pacific was questioned, as we discussed earlier, right? That big jump in close to 3,000 miles of some of these shards found on Tongatapu makes it, that's where the question marks came of, oh, these people were just flowing island to island and slowly went eastward, is really challenged with that data that they're finding with that unique tan shard. Rather, the possibility was raised that Polynesia has been colonized directly from Central Island Melanesia. The data were thin and they were derived from a site heavily disturbed from the construction of a late prehistoric burial mound. As most of Nukuleka archaeological collection has been destroyed in 2003, a project was implemented in 2007 in order to evaluate further the site status as a founder settlement and gain insight into the nature of this occupation, the integrity of its archaeological record, and status of its place in oceanic prehistory. Additional test excavations and survey of Nukuleka Peninsula provided further data essential to site understanding and site context. So first, based on radiocarbon dates, we relate the beginning of the settlement securely between 2,850 and 2,900 years ago. It is more difficult to define an end date, but we suggest it predates terminal Eastern Lapita at 2,650 years ago, based on the distribution of ceramics and complex decorative applications. This includes a series of vessels with tan paste body fabrics and sandpaper temper inclusions that are exotic to Tonga and probably Fiji. Several of these have Western Lapita style decorative motifs that, in some cases, are replicated in vessels made of local clays. Transformation of the decorated assemblage into one of the dominants of simplified injured Lapita motifs as rapid. So basically, once again, looking at a pretty rapid move, if that was a legitimate idea of moving from Melanesia to Polynesia. Let's see here. Other side ultimately facilitates new insight into the cultural, if not biological, basis from which ancestral Polynesian society emerged. So really, what this study really is pointing to is they had ideas come out from the initial Nukuleka studies of Nukuleka being a origin colony for Polynesia. They came, so that was like in 2003 and 1999. They found those tan paste sherds. They came back in 2007, did more studies, and really gave more evidence to make them think or to validate even further. Obviously, nothing's ever 100%, but the additional time that they spent to study the sherds did not weaken the idea of Nukuleka being a origin colony for Polynesia, but actually further strengthened the idea. That was basically the summary of the study after the fact. Let's see here. Hey, Jen says, hey, Toko, you should look up Japan's underwater pyramid. The Yonaguni looks similar to the pyramid mounds of Tongatapu, something for, and that's actually kind of an interesting point there, Jen. Daniel Fale has shared an interesting story of some of the oral history behind Maui Kisi Kisi. And really, the story behind that is supposedly Maui Kisi Kisi gets that name because he wore a headset that had two bow kind of things go over it that made it look like a dragonfly. And supposedly the oral history says is from some of the islands that Maui went to. And when you look at some of the Japanese emperors' headpieces, there's one that has that same look on it. And so there's that oral history that, Maui Kisi Kisi got it from that headdress and probably from Japan. So interesting that you say that. Tongan South Burley was saying that because the sand resembles how he dated the sites in the genealogy, they call this action continental drifts. That's a little more sophisticated than my knowledge there, but it looks like Tongan South is going to give more meaning. Surface divergent, which means oceanic plates crashing into each other to create more lands. Yeah. Tectonic activity can lead to that. Moa says, do they feel that there are some older sites? I mean, there could be older sites. And that's where this article is going to come into more. I mean, so far, that's the oldest one that they found is in Nukuleka, and then tying it to the unique nature of the origin of some of the sands in the pottery from central Melanesia and some of the motifs on the Lepita pottery being also duplicated on local clay pots or pots made from the local clay on Tongatapu is where they're kind of deriving this founding colony in Nukuleka for all of Polynesia. Let's come back here. So this article right here, earliest evidence for pit cultivation provides insight on the nature of first Polynesian settlement. So let's just read the abstract, but I'll kind of give kind of like the overall summary, and then we'll read some of the specific sections on this. But really what this comes down to is one of the features that they found at the Nukuleka settlement is the oldest kind of pit farming structure in Polynesia. And what is this pit farming, technology? It is a technique of isolating a specific location by digging a pit, putting layers of soil and ceramics to do two things: isolate fresh water from salt water and building basically a type of soil that encourages the flourishing of plants. And when you're in atolls or low-laying coral islands, one of the biggest challenges is maintaining fresh water, not being overrun and overtaken by salt water, which then destroys agriculture. We'll kind of read into it. But the oldest finding of that exercise is at Nukuleka, and that this is a farming activity that's not only found throughout Polynesia, but also in parts of Melanesia as well. So let's take a look at it. It says, first Polynesian settlement by Lapita peoples occurred around 2,850 years ago at Nukuleka, then a small sandy island at the entrance of the lagoon on the island of Tongatapu, Kingdom of Tonga. Recent studies document the presence of a planting pit here where, with interception of the Gibbon-Herzberg freshwater lens and use of organic mulch, aroids could be grown. Original pit excavation is dated to first landfall or shortly hereafter. Dates further indicate that the pit was filled between 2,690 and 2,390 years ago. The saturated malt combined with coralline sand in the pit bottom resulted in a gray-brown silty sand planting matrix. Microfossil analysis of the sediments have identified oceanic colchins, including giant swamp taro. So basically, this is cape, talo, banana, candle nut. I don't even know what that is, but obviously, and then pandanus and coconut. Also present in the matrix are large numbers of lapita ceramic sherds. These probably added for moisture retention and possibly nutrients as they degrade. The planting pit is the earliest record evidence for this type of cultivation in Oceania. It illustrates an ingenious exploration strategy for Lapita people that is well adapted to most types of islands they would encounter. So it is basically the development of a new farming, irrigation, and soil, adding nutrients to the soil to defend it from, salt water and poor soil types. And they're finding that it's the oldest usage of this is at the Nukuleka site, which would further push the narrative that the original founder colony for Polynesia comes from Nukuleka, according to these studies, right? So multiple lines of evidence support claims for Nukuleka as a founder colony for Polynesia, not the least being its standing as the earliest securely dated site in Polynesia. So let's see some comments here. I don't want to get too far. So think about it, how old that discovery is. I'm assuming this is imagine how long before that they were on Tonga. No, that's a fair point. And that's, I like to make a distinguishing kind of comment on that. I'm open to the idea that there were either people there before or after, right? I'm kind of agnostic, if you want to say that. But what I will say is when we look at the development of the ideology, whether it's religious, political, social, military, or scientific knowledge, that's where I say the origin of the Polynesian civilization that can be independent of whether there were already people on Tongatapu, Hamo, and all the other Polynesian islands. Because I could see that as two separate things in my perspective, more on that. Hey, Malo, welcome to the live digital kava session here, the Polynesianized podcast. Tongan Sky, very cool about the farming. The first farmers were in Mesopotamia. I mean, mound builders are found throughout the world: Mesopotamia, Egypt, North and South America, Southeast Asia, right? There is this common thread of mound builders, and obviously Tongatapu is the greatest example in all of Polynesia of mound builders. They do LiDAR scannings on Tongatapu, and they found over 10,000 man-made mounds, right? And we almost all just talk about the Langis and so forth on La Paja and some of the other Tuitonga settlements, but mound building was an essential part of culture, politics, religion on Tongatapu, which is also a centralized focus for mound builders around the world. And all these societies or civilizations around the world with mound builders, they have Stonehenges, they have pyramids, they have a sophisticated understanding of um, astronomy. Sorry, guys, it's been a long week, right? Yeah, the greatest mound culture for sure, Docs. I mean, that's one of the other things that I just say it's hard to kind of overlook Tongatapu and not say with the intense mound building, the density of power as shown by the layers of chiefly titles, the ruins, and so forth. Just it's kind of hard to kind of ignore all of that and not take the position that Tongatapu was the center of the Polynesian Empire nation. Would have been a discovery group first, then next group would go in, start farming the land, then spread from there. Yeah, very interesting. The Masi had shared that there is the oral history of where the term motu comes, right? And it actually, that oral history says it comes from two words, moloki, motutu, which I guess, you find a new land, it's overrun with plants, you trample it, you burn it, and then you start implementing farming techniques before groups come in. So that's supposedly one of the oral histories of the origin of the word motu is moloki motutu. And that's where, motu comes from, according to some of the oral history that Masi has shared. All right, we'll skim here. Let's see what else is here. Oh yeah, so this is that planting pit usage, and it talks about how it's something that's relatively common throughout the Pacific. The practice of planting pit cultivation is found in different areas of Oceania today, particularly on atolls and coralline soils. Planting pit use and success are based on the Jaysen-Herzberg principle, where because seawater is denser than fresh water, the latter floats to the top. So once again, it's protecting the soil, creating a soil condition, and making sure that the salt water and the seawater do not mix. Planting pits are excavated deep enough into the sand to intercept the freshwater lens, while addition of mulch provides nutrients for growth. The boundary between the lens and salt water is not distinct. It is a zone of brackish water where saline content increases with depth. Giant swamp taro, a hydrophytic species with some tolerance for salinity, has been the dominant crop for pit cultivation. On some atolls, however, is similarly grown in planting pits, sometimes in association with swamp taro. So once again, this is a critical technology to survive. It says here some of the Marshall Islands use the same thing, and this is basically a picture of using that technique. So that pit goes down, you have the different layers of mulch and so forth in there, and as you can see, it's pretty effective. You're able to increase the density of the crop in that area, and this is kind of an interesting thing here. So how much food the Nukuleka pit may have contributed to early Lapita subsistence economy can be approximated from the contemporary cultivation of the Cryptosema mercusi, the dominant aeroid for pit cultivation in Micronesia. Varieties today vary in size, but all are large, attaining heights of 3 to 4 meters over a 2 to 4 year growing period and producing edible corms of 5 to 10 kgs. On coarse corms of 72 kgs were harvested after 10 years of growth. So really, some of the things that they talk about here is this was a great way to kind of make sure you had food. It's almost like a food storage where you would just plant it and leave it there. And if there was ever a shortage of food or issue, that's where you could go for food. So right here, it says Kirk has documented this type of practice in Futuna, Western Polynesia, where Cristomira growing within a wet ravine produced a food reservoir for times of shortage. Additionally, extensive cryptosperma pit gardens in the Marshall Islands often contain large corms, which are left unharvested for years, thus acting as a ready reserve starch rich food. So, once again, this survival technique or technology um, originating from Nukuleka, and once again, kind of further validating the idea of Nukuleka as a um, original colony of Polynesian uh, society and civilization. Let's see here if there's anything towards the end here. This is just going over the tables of the data. So once again, the discovery of pit cultivation at Nukuleka and its association with the earliest founder colony provides fundamental insight heretofore absent in the Lapita archaeological record. Planting pit cultivation importantly illustrates the specialized knowledge, facilitating a predetermined and ingenious exploration approach that is well adapted to most oceanic islands. Pit cultivation does not require appropriate soil conditions for successful planting, nor does it need detailed knowledge of rainfall patterns to ensure growth. Rather, the requisite for success is a sandy substrate geomorphology where, with excavation of the pit, a freshwater lens can be tapped. Once in place, a planting pit provides relative certainty that at least one species of translocated aeroid planting stock, so that talo, basically that taro, right, or cape, can be propagated effectively and potentially a second source. At the same time, pit cultivation facilitates the location of founder colonies in strategic locales with ease of access to the littoral zone for foraging and fishing. In some cases, it would demand it. At Nukuleka, stilt house construction was literally integrated into the offshore shellfish beds where cool ocean breezes and reduced numbers of biting insects. So, anyways, what we're getting to here is really multiple data points pointing to Nukuleka being a founder colony for Polynesia. We're kind of getting that's really what it comes down to, and that's pretty much the end of the study here. But it really just boils down to the fact not only the unique nature of the Lapita pottery sherds that they found there, and also some of it originally directly from Central Malaysia or Melanesia, kind of discredits the island by island approach. Obviously, they went from Central Melanesia straight into Tongatapu with that technology. If you believe in that theory, I'm not quite sold on that yet. That's one evidence of Nukuleka being a founding colony for Polynesia. Then you add into there this pit farming technique and technology, also indicating that um, Nukuleka is in origin of the Polynesian expansion. So those are a couple studies that we walk through. Once again, other data points. This is to me not necessarily a smoking gun, but additional data points um, to further propagate the idea of Tongatapu being the origin of the Polynesian civilization. And now we're looking at, even if you heavily lean towards the Lapita pottery origins, I'm not as necessarily as big of a believer in that, but this is, yeah. So we'll see. With that being said, there's another question here. Have these so-called academic people updated their knowledge? I don't know. Maybe there's always new stuff coming out. Um, if more stuff comes out, we'll probably see them on articles and so forth. With new findings, like I said, in all the studies that we find, that's interesting, Mo. every time they dig further and further into the Tuitonga on Tonga Tapu, dates get older and older and older. So not sure in specifically these topics in these articles, but in other things in dating the ruins and Tuitonga lines, the new data suggests an older timeline. So I'll kind of hold it there for a couple seconds to see if there's any questions, comments. But that's pretty much what we have on the agenda for the show today. Hopefully, everybody were able to pick up something of value. Once again, we still get the question, "Hey Tua, hey Masi, what's the schedule for the lives and so forth?" This is, like I said, I've been traveling all week. I'll be probably being in the East Coast again for a couple days next week. But really, it's whenever we get time to dive into it. So, as the side gig for the love of the game, we do this. We really appreciate all of our Polynesian brothers and sisters joining in on the Kava sessions. This is why we have them. We want to discuss. We want to have a conversation. Because as always, we always talk about being unified as a people. We always talk about pushing together in the same direction. I agree with that 100%. But we have to do, it's only possible when it's built on as much truth as possible. And it requires us understanding where and how we came together as a people. We can't even agree amongst ourselves where the origins are, right? There's an Eastern Polynesian oral history says they come from Tapu Tapu Atea. We have ideas of Ha'amoa. We have ideas of Fiji. We have ideas of Tonga Tapu all over the place. We got to get aligned. We got to figure out what the truth is. One of the ways to do so is to have conversations. So let's get aligned. Great comment here from Renegade. Yep, 100%. We talked about those. We got a cheer. We got the Matema Tonga versus Australia and the Kiwis coming up. We got the Toa Samoa going to England, hoping they have success there. But really, the end of the day, really want to thank everyone's support. Appreciate all the likes, all the shares, all the comments on social media. It does help us get the message out, bring more people to the conversation. And with that being said, thank you everyone for joining us. And as always, stay curious, be willing to ask the hard questions, and follow the truth wherever it may lead us. Till next time, Polynesian Nation, stay safe, stay happy, and peace. Malo.
Yeah.